Today is Sunday, July 3rd. Victoria is going to discuss clearing obstacles on the path today. So we'll meditate, and then she will take over. I'm going to close this. Sorry. Okay, let's set our intention, make aspirations by saying the four immeasurables prayer. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering.
May all beings be never separated
from the happiness that
is
has never
free
known
from
suffering.
sorrow.
May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment, anger, and aversion. Okay, for those of you who are new, we're not doing a review this week, so if you don't know the technique, it's probably best to either just try your best to stay with us or go to the Meditation with Michael Imperioli YouTube and look at the first two classes of this year. It has detailed review of basic technique. Let's start with the 9 purifying breaths. We start with the right hand, thumb to the ring finger, closed. We're the opposite. We're working the 3 subtle body channels. Now we're moving to the left channel. We go to the opposite nostril and breathe into the channel. Clear it out. To the central blue channel. Final out breath, imagine it going through the crown chakra, merging our consciousness with space. Take that into meditation. try to be aware of what the mind is doing. If you find yourself thinking, you can either go back to the breath, focus on the breath where it's moving between the nostrils and upper lip. You can imagine it as a cloud that has arisen in a stainless, limitless, pure blue sky. And once we become aware of it, we leave it where it is. We don't follow it, we don't push it away, we don't get it lost in the story of the thought and see it dissipating, dissolving back into the clarity of sky from which it came. Just like thoughts dissolve back into the nature of mind from where they come. They don't alter it. They don't change it. This awareness of what the mind is doing is most critical. First of all, just recognizing that there is an awareness of what mind is doing. And then trying to rest in that. Know that it's open and spacious. Open and spacious and limitless. Empty, aware. And know that all the thoughts that arise in that spaciousness are temporary, are the result of our habitual tendencies, karmic, ripening karmic tendencies, but they're definitely impermanent. But the spaciousness is not impermanent, like space is not impermanent. And the spaciousness and the awareness are one and the same. when the thought is dissolved in that spaciousness, that awareness, that nature of mind, we can rest there. There's peace, there's calm. The lamas say rest in that natural great peace. Natural great peace. Which is the nature of mind. Great. And remember, this is really the only way to cultivate and get in touch with this awareness is through meditation. You know, you have to study and learn the teachings, but to apply the teachings, this is what you have to do. There's no way. There's no way without that, really. You know, and no way of making. No way of really making some kind of spiritual progress in the Buddhist context, at least, you know, without this practice. And without starting to bring that mindfulness and that awareness, getting in touch with that awareness in your day-to-day life. With that, Victoria is going to take us through today discussion on clearing obstacles on the path.
Victoria is going to try to discuss clearing obstacles on the way. As best as I can, obviously. So last week we talked about inner and outer obstacles. Outer obstacles, in both cases, it is the meeting and the ripening of karma that we created. Because remember, karma, the word karma itself, simply means action. So the results of our action is what we meet as outer and inner obstacles. Our body is a result of our previous actions. Our world, our circumstances, if we live in a peaceful country, we have enough, we get a meal several meals every day. Those are all outer karmic things. We live in a big house, we live in a small house, what kind of family we have, what kind of body, what kind of, outer circumstances. Those are outer karmic things. They're not always obstacles. But that's our karma, good and bad, always mixed. And the inner obstacles are the obstacles that are basic negative behaviors, good, and not always negative, but emotional behaviors are responses to things that we experience. They are often negative. And so when we react to things with negative judgment, we repeat and feed into our previously created negative patterns, and we reinforce them. So when we find ourselves stuck in negative relationships with others, and every time that person walks into a room, and right away our feeling becomes very difficult, tight, the space becomes very small, constricted, because our mind immediately jumps to a particular kind of a judgment. We place the judgment not just upon the person, but that judgment is our interior space. And so in that instance, what happens is that we're reinforcing the previous negative emotional pattern. And we're also creating new karma. And that's how karma is created. Karma is created by walking into the territory of the ego. So when we're in the world and we're simply perceiving something, we see a form and we add a name to it. We say this is a flower. That in itself does not create any kind of karma, neither negative nor positive. But if we say, I hate this flower because at my wedding I had that flower as my wedding bouquet and I hate my ex-husband and da-da-da-da, we go off into this whole negative narrative. What happens is we go away from the pure perception of something and its name. That simply allows us to organize information, in our mind stream. We venture from just this open space of perception that our awareness is capable of, because this is what mind is. It's a continuous stream of awareness. As long as we exist, we perceive and we are aware of things. But we venture from this pure open experience of perception within this open space of awareness. We now venture into the ego territory. I hate this. This is unpleasant to me. Da 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 da. We've gone into this structure of the ego and its mechanisms, and that is what constricts us. And we have to be very, very careful, and we have to use the view, and we have to use meditation, and we have to use a lot of wisdom that we gain in meditation within this open space that we attempt to cultivate when we're sitting in meditation. That is within which thoughts happen, within which perceptions and judgments occur. We try to separate and distinguish the open space of our awareness from the events, from the clouds that take place within this awareness. And so we do that in order to cultivate kind of being aware of our base nature, of the ground, of our foundation, of the depth of our nature. And we try to distinguish that by meditating and experiencing the quality of that space to that other space when we are propelled through propensity and inability a lot of times just to stop our habitual patterns from propelling us into the ego territory. What I wanted to specifically address today, and this is something that happened to me over this last week, I've come very, very aware that a lot of my negative judgments have to do with a part of myself, with my inner space, which I cannot accept. I've come to this very clear realization, and this is almost like venturing more into Western psychology, but we, of course, are here in a Buddhist environment, so I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a psychoanalyst, and I don't really want to venture into it, but I just want to point something out based on my own experience, which is we should all examine, especially when we are locked into habitual negative patterns with others, how much of those negative habitual patterns have to do with portions of ourselves of which we are not accepting. So we have, a difficult parent or a spouse or a child, and we're always kind of saying, he is so and so, he's so impatient, he's such an asshole, he's such a douchebag, he's so ungenerous, he is so lazy. What I urge everyone to do is to examine how much of this is a projection of our inner space, of the very qualities that we cannot accept and forgive inside ourselves. So what we do with that energy, what we do with that portion of ourselves is very often we tend to externalize it and judge it very, very harshly and deal with it in a very particular kind of a way that then again locks us into this creating and spinning the wheel of Dharma and creating more negativity, as karmic consequences in our lives. But I kind of started to see over this last week that a lot of these qualities, for example, I say, I have a very narcissistic mother, she's impatient, she's this and this, you know, but how much of it is also the qualities that are my qualities, but they're simply qualities that I won't forgive or deal inside myself. They're qualities that I suppress and reject in myself, you know also as a Buddhist, I can never forget, the absolute interconnectedness of why that particular person is my mother, why that particular person is my child, why that particular person is my spouse or a coworker. This is the interdependence. This is what we have, as the relative portion of our life, as long as we live here in this, phenomenal world. These interconnections are they are our existence. The fact that we live in a particular kind of a house, we live in a particular kind of society, that all that is a result of being deeply, deeply and inextricably interconnected to others. The fact that we have a certain form of government or a certain form of life or a certain, form of society is because others have placed those things there for us. Others who had civic minds, have placed causes and conditions for our happiness. And the fact that we experience things that we take for granted day and night is a result of someone else placing those causes and conditions for us to experience the results. In the same way, whatever difficult situations we have, those are the causes and conditions we ourselves created and generated. And so, why I'm asking everyone to really examine uh, these habitual patterns and to see how much of it are the things that are very intrinsic to us is because if we don't change those things within us, we will not stop the potter's wheel of creating, the perpetuating of creation of karma. And I also realized, somehow in a very, very clear way that if I don't have forgiveness and acceptance, first seeing and then accepting and then forgiving those particular qualities that I blame on others, when I say I have a difficult parent, I have a difficult child, they are very much my own qualities. And they're also my interconnections. There is a reason why those particular individuals are my parent or my children or my coworkers. That is called karma. The links, the interconnectedness, interdependence is my particular type of karma. So it's really up to all of us to really delve into these undesirable corners and to see how much of it is something that we project onto others because there are qualities that we very deeply want to suppress inside ourselves. We all have this kind of a public persona of the desired qualities that we wish to project to the world. That's our Facebook page, our profile, our, the face we bring to work, the face we, put at dinner. But then there's another portion of us, the darker, the more secretive, the deeper piece of us. But that piece doesn't have to be necessarily negative. So what if we find that, we're afraid of everything because, we're anticipating negative results and we become paralyzed and then we call it lazy and we become very judgmental about it. So what if we're not 100% patient? Of course, because we're still like little seedlings, we have to be our own gardeners. And I also realized, that if we don't find these qualities on ourselves and we have no acceptance of them, there is no way that we can possibly forgive those qualities in others. This is really the mechanism, is that not accepting and acknowledging these certain kinds of qualities inside ourselves, we will never find forgiveness and therefore never find resolution and change going from negative to positive in those difficult relationships. I'm not going to venture to say that all of it has to rest with us, but I will venture as far as to say that a lot of the things we find that are negative in others have to do with these portions of ourselves with which we don't even want to acknowledge that exist, and that we judge very harshly inside ourselves. And so there's a mechanism by which a human mind likes to just project all of that outside and say, it's all out there, it's not here. It's all the pollution and poison exists outside of me. But we can't forget as practitioners that we are a part of everything. We are interconnected with everyone and everything in this world. This world is, we're like a cellular structure of the totality. We're parts and pieces of the whole. The whole separatedness, being not connected to others and not being connected to everything, that's just a delusion, This is what is called ignorance. So, being practitioners using wisdom, we we understand these interconnections, but we also use the view, and so we connect to our foundation. We connect to our Buddha nature. We do that in meditation. We connect with those three aspects of our three doors: body still, voice silent, mind spacious. And we examine those qualities. And the minute we kind of like, if we do it within that big grand theater of our awareness, and we look at these qualities and we say, yes, I am impatient. Yes, I am small-minded. Yes, I'm very much like that person that I'm criticizing day and night and writing on them. But I now see that quality and I'm gonna work on it. Because the beauty is that change and impermanence, that means that we can evolve, we can change, we can dissolve little by little these conditions and structures and these habitual patterns, and little by little we can make them better, we can evolve. And so I feel like if we have difficult people in our life and we haven't experienced any change over a long period of time, or the changes have been really minor and insignificant, to me that's kind of like a pointer that those qualities we haven't witnessed and acknowledged them inside ourselves, and we have not been forgiving within ourselves toward those qualities. And we all have them, there's nothing to be embarrassed about it. We're all ignorant, we're all small-minded, we're all petty. Yes, we have ideals. We want to be better because we're practitioners. We want to be, patient. We want to be generous. And of course, ultimately we want to base all of our activities and interactions on wisdom as opposed to ignorance. But we won't start that process until we can acknowledge things in ourselves. These dark corners have to be illuminated by our wisdom mind. And remember, a lot of those difficult things, have to do with our ego space, not our nature. I mean, it's not our nature. We almost live in this weird dichotomy all the time, and as a result of it, so much of the difficulty that we experience is the tension between wisdom and ignorance, because ignorance is always creating karma and negativity, and wisdom is always trying to pull it out of the hole. Watch your mind when you go from the basic perception and where the mind has moved away from the basic perception into the sphere of judgment and ego. Because all this reaction, the judgment, that is karma. Watch how that movement takes place. And when we have judgment, watch the three modalities of judgment. Negative judgment, judgment of attachment, judgment. Negative judgment is a judgment where we hate something and we feel that we're threatened, our ego is threatened by something, or we desire it greatly, and that's attachment. Or we have this kind of bizarre neutrality where we don't give a shit when somebody's dying next to us, or when they're going hungry and we don't really care. This mental dullness, which is really even worse than the two negative, judgments of anger and attachment. I want this or I hate this. The neutrality, this not caring about something, is sometimes even considered worse. It's not, neutrality maybe is an incorrect word, but not caring about something, not giving a shit about something, is sometimes even worse than the other two reactions. Remember that whenever you venture from pure perception into judgment, you're venturing into two things: bondage and production of karma. So watch that space very carefully. You've been meditating, you've been becoming aware of your open nature, of your basic nature, your Buddhahood, of that open, wide awareness space, like sky-like space. And you watch all these things happening, all these little events happening like clouds. Remember, the clouds will always dissolve into the sky, like the waves will always dissolve into the ocean. So watch your mind and know your mind and be forgiving, and don't be afraid to go deeply and discover that, yes, I don't have patience, yes, I'm not generous, yes, I'm like this and like this. Do not be afraid. That's not all that you have. Remember, besides ego, which is a tiny little portion, you have your broad awareness, within the space of which all the other things take place. Expand that difficult space. Make it like a movie theater, and just know you can get out of this movie theater and go into theater number 2 and number 3. And all of our lives are like having this, limitless space, and then having all of these movie theaters where we enact and participate in all these dramas that we create, we direct, we star, and we act in, and whatnot. Remember, the movie theater is not the space. The movie theater is just a tiny little creation. It's like being asleep for 5 minutes. You're going to get out of that movie theater and then go into the next movie theater that also, our mind has created. And limitless amount of movie theaters. The movie theater of being a parent, the movie theater of being a child, the movie theater of being a neighbor, the movie theater of being a coworker. Those are all of our creations. But remember, they're all within the bigger, greater, limitless space. And remember that our nature needs nothing. It's perfect. And, what we need to work on are these little, the places of where there's this darkness and there's this, tightness. Also something to keep in mind that's very, very important, and this I just, jotted down these notes from a teaching of Garchen Rinpoche on YouTube that's called, she gave a series of teachings on intention. Garchen Rinpoche is Khandro. Garchen Rinpoche, and these particular teachings had to do with intention. She made an incredible point of saying, remember the different shades of negativity. We may not all be dealing with gross anger, and we don't want to kill this person, but the shades of anger are this, and I'm going to just list them out how she listed them out. Irritation, disappointment, anxiousness, sadness, cynicism, restlessness, doubt, hesitation, and fear. All these are shades and levels of anger. Because underneath all these reactions, there is something that we feel a threat to our ego. Our ego feels a threat. And very often, so if you feel like you're stuck in a cynical relationship with your partner, or you're riding your child day and night, or, you're stuck in fear or sadness, there is some, because often we're so result oriented, often we feel paralyzed and sad because we're afraid to go out there and do stuff because we're kind of already decided with our, subtly angry mind that the results are going to be shit anyway, so there's no point in going out and working on this and doing this because, and the difference here is, our ego is being threatened. It isn't our nature. And, by the time we say to ourselves, this person is dangerous to me, so I have to act this and this and this, anger is an appropriate response. Or this person is an asshole, so I have to be cynical with them, and this is an appropriate response. By the time we say appropriate response, we've covered up for the ego. We no longer even examine this response. But the truth of the matter is, the bondage happens within ourselves in our internal space. What that means is that that response is not just like creating negative karma between me and that person, but even worse is that I am in bondage with my ego, because what I'm doing, in fact, is disconnecting from my nature, my open space, my fearless space, and connecting only with my ego, because I'm protecting my ego, and I'm protecting some kind of a response that the ego said, well, that person threatens me, so I have to act this way every single time. So, watching all this kinds of space, always trying to use your wisdom mind, opening up, whenever the situation becomes very, very tight, doing Tonglen for yourself and the other person in that moment, and expanding that tightness and darkness and shedding the light of our nature. Because remember, the nature of mind is luminosity and compassion, because the basic nature, the energy of our awareness, our basic nature. There are two qualities. The luminous quality, that we are aware, and the energy of that is our compassion, because we're not afraid of anything. Our energy is limitless, In that, within that space, there are no obstacles, there are no impediments. So we don't have to be afraid to be kind and generous. There's really nothing impeding us within that open space. And so, I hope it's productive, and I hope that we will think about those things and the mechanisms. We will watch the space of entering into the space of judgment. We will look how the source of where it's created, how we perpetuate the bondage the minute we enter into that space. And, we will work with accepting difficult parts of ourselves so that we can accept the difficult parts of others and liberate ourselves and others. Do I have time to read a quote from Rinpoche?
Yeah.
Okay. So, this is a quote from a teaching that Rinpoche did some years ago. It's
Garchen Rinpoche?
Garchen Rinpoche, sorry. Garchen Rinpoche, and this is a teaching and commentary on view, meditation, and conduct, on the final words of Garab Dorje, and this is Garchen Rinpoche commenting on Patrul Rinpoche, on Garab Dorje's view, meditation, and conduct. And this is just a passage from that. Whether or not one is liberated depends on whether one acts out of confidence in the view, knowing our nature, or acts in the usual sense, meaning the ignorant sense. For example, pointing to someone at random, let's say, I don't like him. I don't know why, but whenever I see him, I say, I don't like him. I clench my teeth every time I see him. If I recognize that, and I realize this aversion, this anger, delusion, well, I don't want to fall under the sway of delusion if I have that recognition. I want my view to overpower delusion, because I know the difference between my nature and this ego space. And so I consciously cultivate an antidote to my reaction to that aversion, or anger, or dislike. Or at least I continually remind myself or remember what's going on, instead of acting out of an impulse, the impulse being delusion. Then little by little the delusion becomes lessened, and it becomes less powerful, and wisdom prevails. And the view becomes stronger. So finally we can walk into the room and I can say, oh, hi, how are you doing? It's good to see you. And I can have a reaction, sincere reaction, because my view has overwhelmed my delusion, rather than vice versa. On the other hand, if we do what we normally do, which is dwell on things, take them seriously, so that every time I see him, I say, oh, darn, I can't come to a teaching of Dzogchen without him showing up. Every time I turn around, there he is. Then you begin to attach a string of negative thoughts about him to it, and it gets tighter and tighter. So that's how delusions become reified and how they become real. The next time I see him, I sock him. Then maybe he goes and gets a weapon and so on. Rather than do that, I understand what's going on in me and stop it before it gets started. And that's how the view will overcome delusion.
Thank you very much. If anybody has any questions, this is the time. I think I read this before, but I'm going to read it again because this is good. This is from Guru Rinpoche. Pamasambhava from the book Treasures from Juniper Ridge. Within the sky-like empty mind, habitual tendencies and disturbing emotions are just like clouds and mist. When they appear within the expanse of the empty mind. When they remain within the expanse of the empty mind. And when they dissolve in the same expanse of that empty mind. I love that. There's another one I wanted to read. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, okay. This is from Zonsa Khense Rinpoche. Since phenomena and momentarily gathered conditions, both material and mental, if we gather or dispel the appropriate conditions, phenomena appear or fall apart. For instance, the phenomenon of a flower is the result of many conditions, including our ability to recognize a flower as a flower by its appearance and attributes. Someone who has never seen a flower before will have no idea what this object is. Likewise, we recognize a house as a house by its appearance and attributes. When the parts of a house, like walls, ceilings, floors, doors, and windows, are assembled in the correct manner, then the phenomenon of a house appears. You cannot deny that. But at the same time, this does not mean that a house truly exists. This learned ability to see beyond the surface of phenomena is so important to develop. Everything is like an optical illusion that is put together in a clever way. But even to say that phenomena are put together is somewhat of an overstatement. Phenomena are not even stitched together. Phenomena are just favorable conditions that happen to converge and manifest for the time being. Phenomena are just favorable conditions that happen to converge and manifest for the time being. But this constellation of factors is not even glued or stitched or bound together like the pages of a book. It's much more haphazard than that. There's a confluence of various factors that combine to temporarily appear as a phenomena of flower or house or human. As long as there is a gatherer and acts of gathering and conditions gathered, there will be continuous phenomena arising, dwelling, and falling in endless waves. Some people wonder whether the stream of perception stops when we reach enlightenment. No. Mind or perception does not stop. According to causes and conditions, when the circumstances are appropriate, appearances will still appear.
I'm sorry, I forgot to add the most important thing to the topic that we were discussing earlier, and that is, if we don't create the appropriate causes and conditions for happiness, we should not ever believe that happiness and the causes of happiness will arise for us. We have to generate those causes and conditions. We have to work on those. So when we are dealing with a difficult person, habitually difficult person in our life that we can't abandon and walk away from, we have to be the first ones who forgive and who reset all the terms and all the conditions. Why? Because we have had the blessing of the Dharma. We have had the blessing of illuminating the dark corners of ourselves. And so we have to be the first and the ones who set those causes and conditions into motion. And this expectation of great stuff just happening to us just by itself, uh, it's worse than childish and silly. It's kind of like really deeply, deeply ignorant. So if we want happiness, that means we have to create causes and conditions for happiness. And a lot of that is going to happen by simply softening and dissolving negativities that currently exist within our mental states right now. I mean, that's where we start. So.
Thank you. Someone's asking, which book is that you read?
Unfortunately, this is just a transcript of a teaching, and these are not available books. Um, but the Khandra Rinpoche teaching that I was quoting from regarding the different shades of our, negative um, of anger, that's on YouTube, Khandra Rinpoche, and those teachings are called intention or on intention.
And the Garchen Rinpoche is commentating on Patrul Rinpoche. Patrul Rinpoche was turn of the century, 19th into 20th century teacher who wrote a very important Tibetan Buddhist text called The Words of My Perfect Teacher, which is very much worth reading. Patrul Rinpoche. Thank you, Victoria. That was fascinating about the shades of negativity and illuminating our dark corners. I will soon be visiting in-laws in a red state who are delighted about certain recent Supreme Court decisions that infuriate me. So I will be keeping my mouth shut and doing a lot of Tonglen.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that's all we can do, But it's always also worth understanding why someone thinks, really going to the causes of why someone holds certain opinions, where the threat is, what is the difficulty, Sometimes people just mimic things that surround them because we so much have to conform to our neighbors, to our environment, to our portions of society where we live. We can't always be individuals and be strong-minded, and sometimes we just fall under the sway of that kind of weight. And so, if we have more spaciousness, we have more, brightness in our minds, we have to have a greater capacity to forgive and understand.
And you don't necessarily have to keep your mouth shut. Sometimes, if there's room for some kind of civil dialogue, discourse, discussion, sometimes that's good. I remember talking early in the Trump, I don't want to get into specific political stuff, but early in the Trump presidency, I was talking to my father, who was kind of optimistic about what Trump was going to do as a president for whatever reason or for whatever information that he was exposed to at the time, And I explained why I wasn't optimistic and why I didn't like him, and it was kind of the first time he actually heard those opinions, because I almost assumed that everyone hears these opinions, they just choose not to put stock in them, believe them, adopt them as their own or something like that. And something, kind of shifted in his understanding of the situation, So, I don't know, you have to use your judgment, your wisdom, and figuring out what, if it's just about you proving a point and winning the argument, and, then it's like, you're getting into situations that might be more negative, destructive, and taxing than they need to be.
it's also like finding the capacity to love those with whom we don't agree. Uh, that should always be a priority for us. We don't need to agree with someone to love them. What are we loving in them? If every time we say we love someone, what are they, just a reflection of ourselves in the mirror? Is this like an act of narcissism? We have to cultivate a capacity of loving those with whom we deeply disagree. We still have to do that. And so finding the space and the ability to do that, doing Tonglen, connecting to your nature, understanding the vast and limitless spaciousness, that's what we have to do. We're practitioners. That's that's practice.
And the next question really kind of is along the same lines. My practice was thrown off last weekend when I saw a white supremacist in the grocery store, obvious with tattoos displayed in the shirt he was wearing. I attempted Tonglen, but it was impossible. Um, I spoke with a local Buddhist to encourage me to feel sympathy for his flawed views. What is challenging for feeling sympathy is that this man looked proud, satisfied. He actually looked happy. How in the world can I not feel anger and hatred towards such a horrible person? I did carry my anger over from seeing this guy to interactions with my family. Yeah, part of the problem is where I live, where these views are common and ubiquitous. How do I not let such people disrupt my equanimity? I mean, one thing you always have to remember is that those kind of views, intentions, actions, are only going to result in the suffering for that person. Whether they, you looked at them and to them they looked to you they looked happy. I mean, that's kind of probably your projection if you think about it. But because no one can, what kind of happiness can you have if you're full of hatred and stuff like that for people? So, but even besides that, karmically, hatred and anger, violence, if that becomes a part of it, those invariably and will definitely result in a lot of suffering for that person. Probably in this life, probably now, in the moment, and for future life. So you have to keep that in mind. And for yourself, it's hard. I mean, you have to. You can't just see it as a failure in your practice if you're just, reacting in anger. You have to notice that and realize that's where you're at, and that's where these things are very hard to get foothold, and trying to have some kind of equanimity and some kind of spaciousness in your own mind around it. But awareness, like you're doing by asking this question and attempting to apply teachings, and knowing that your practice is thrown off, and knowing that your anger carried over from this into your interactions with the family, says that you're having, there is a level of awareness over your own reaction to it, which is very, very important and very encouraging. Do you want to add anything to that?
I mean, when a person carries around a facade like the person you just described that you saw in the supermarket, think about their interior, the kind of level of threat that that person must be feeling, that they have to signal to the whole world, I hate this and this, and it along very pretty clearly stated lines, who the threat is and who that person hates. So knowing that exterior and this, and the interior, which causes that combination of things, we don't want to mimic that same kind of a world. And we do have to find compassion for, someone who's that threatened, and who lives in that kind of a level of negativity. As Michael said, every moment that we spend inside that negativity is, making the wheel of karma spin very, very fast, causing tremendous amount of obstacles to arise for us now and in the future. So, you know, it always helps me personally to think of that level of anger and insanity as, as mental disease. If you can look at someone like that as mentally impaired, because that's exactly what's happening. It is a mental impairment to live in that high level of fear, and negativity. It can only be, experienced as a deep, deep threat to oneself and one's way of life, one's own definition of the self. And so it very much resembles like a person who's experiencing a mental breakdown, practically, uh, or an animal who's running in the woods. So trying to find like a level of coexisting with that person, and having some kind of trying to find some kind of trying to trying to find some kind of sympathy for that, which will require not engaging with them on an identical political level. It isn't about political views. We know that that view is a product of the deepest of deepest delusions. So for sure, one, not getting on the same platform with them in terms of reactivity, and two, trying to find some kind of compassion for someone who lives in that level of poison and delusion.
Yeah, and remember, it's impossible to know what someone's karma will be or is. Only a Buddha knows that. What the next incarnation is, and we don't know. This person could become enlightened in this life. Milarepa, was someone who created a lot of negative karma in the same lifetime, achieved enlightenment. You know, but this kind of mental state of hatred and anger and all that will undoubtedly lead to negative circumstances. And if someone dies with that, pretty much that will carry over into the next life. So it's like when we see in this life an innocent child somehow going through really unimaginable suffering, either at the hands of someone else or because of some disease or things like that. And we think about how unjust that is, right? But that very well may be that through something like this, some very, very negative karma coming from one life into the next and manifesting. So if you think about this, you can almost take it into the next lifetime and think about this innocent child that's going to kind of maybe suffer greatly because of this grown person's negative intentions and thoughts and mindset.
Yeah, and living in anger and hatred is living in pain right now. It's not a state of happiness. Obviously, it's antithetical to the state of happiness. So, having compassion for that as well, and understanding that there's a great deal of suffering that goes with hatred and anger.
And it is very difficult to deal with, and sometimes, these things have to be. You're in a position where these things have to be opposed, and stood up to. There's situations where you will, and there's situations where you leave it where it is. But you have to use your wisdom and understanding that and seeing what the time is right for that or not.
And Michael said many, many times, so when we see things like that, this social injustice or whatever that we consider social injustice in the world, instead of seething in our own emotional negativity and creating the bondage and, causes and conditions for suffering for ourselves, we should instead try to act and find how we can communicate that energy and use its impetus for action that will bring about a positive result.
I'll never forget this story I read, and I wish I could remember who it was and who it involved and what it was. But there was an American guy, white supremacist, and there was a black man who might have been connected to the clergy in this town. And somehow they had some interaction. I'm not sure what it was. I wish I knew the details. But basically, in essence, the black man confronted this guy in a very composed way and just asked to talk to him. and really hear what this guy was saying. And then the black guy spoke of why that was wrong and why, basically just addressing it honestly, without anger, but being direct, with a lot of compassion, you know. And this guy, this white supremacist, like that whole thing broke in him. That whole level of hatred and racism, white supremacy, just broke from this guy's attempt, from the black guy's attempt to kind of connect with him on a human level. And they became like best friends for the rest of their lives. I wish, if anyone knows this story, it happened probably in the last maybe 15, 20 years. To the point where I think, if I'm not mistaken, the white guy took care of the black guy when the black guy got sick, something like that. Like it was complete 180 situation. So we also have to remember that that's possible too. So I mean, although in the moment when you walk into a supermarket and see someone with that kind of display, it's extremely hard. So don't beat yourself up if you are not able to click in the moment. But your awareness that you're obviously that's coming to the surface, that's a good sign. So have faith in that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Nick Solidio, our producer, for his kindness and generosity, without which this class would never happen. Let's dedicate the merit that we generated from this class to the benefit of all beings, including that person you saw in the supermarket. By this merit, may all beings attain the state of enlightenment and conquer the enemies of faults and delusion. May they be liberated from this ocean of samsara and its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. See you next week.